There we go. Let me share my screen with you again. All right. Should be able to see my screen there. I can see on my monitor. You can see it there. But thanks everybody for joining us today. As I go through these first couple of minutes, if someone else pops in and I see it, if you hear me pause for some reason, the reason I'm doing that is just to let some additional people in the room with us. Had a lot of signups for this thing, but as usual, if you signed up for it and you can't attend today, you'll be seeing this recording later on. Exactly how we did it. I don't edit the recording, so all this information that'll be presented is exactly how I said it, good and bad. So. With that said, again, I want to welcome everybody. If you don't know me, my name's Russell Graves. I'm coming to you today from the barn at Hackberry Farm. This is a little space we have. I work from a lot. It's atypical from my office, but we can thank Starlink for my ability to come to you live from out here now because before I had a different internet setup living out here in the country. It wasn't the best, and so I really had to be hardwired with my computer back into my router back over at the house. But now I can come to you a little bit remote on our property from the barn. So that it's just a lot more interesting spot than my little home office is. So that's why I'm coming to you live today. So today's topic is bird photography beyond the basics. And I think it's important to define what I know as the basics. And for me, the basics are you see a bird in a tree, you point the camera at it, you press the button, you may or may not get a good picture. But even so, if you get a good picture, there's some strategies I think that you can employ to your bird photography to really elevate your craft and elevate your success. One of the things I do want to mention as we go along is I'll always like to make this a dialogue and not a monologue. So if you have any questions as I go through this thing, feel free to ask. Just feel free to ask through Zoom or there's a chat feature in there. You can add it in the chat. Now, I'll tell you on the chat because I am doing this by myself. I may not see it right away, so I may have to just go back and forth and look at the chat as some more stuff pops up on there. So I've got to make a conscious effort. Again, I'm a one-man show today. I don't have a back end of people helping me, so I'm trying to manage all the letting everybody in and do the webinar and answer questions all at the same time. So, but I'm here as long as you want to be here. So if you have any questions, I want to make sure I'm thorough and ask everybody and answer everyone's questions for them and make sure everyone gets all the information they need from this webinar. But again, thank you for signing up. Thanks for spending a little bit of time with me today, and hopefully we learned something. But we're all going to have a good time. So, bird photography beyond the basics. I love bird photography. In fact, I went out to if you've heard me talk very much at all, I've got this project I call Redlands Ranch out in western Texas. I was out there for the past couple of days, just kind of the middle of the late winter sort of visit just to see what's going on and check on the place and make sure the water hole has water and make sure no pack rats have moved into the blind and do all the maintenance stuff I need to do. So I was out there with it for a couple of days and spent a little time in the blind shooting pictures. And it's always a joy when birds come up. And we had our fair share of mammals come to the water hole, but when birds come up, it's so much fun. And I think the reason it's fun, I think you'll agree, and why I think we had a couple of hundred people sign up for this webinar today. The reason why we had so many people sign up because I think my affinity for photographing birds is shared with a lot of people. I mean, there's so many varieties, so many different types of birds, so many different sizes of birds. And so it makes it a real challenging part of nature photography. But I think if you think through some of these things we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about everything today. We're going to talk about, what I consider, what the things I consider whenever I'm out trying to take bird pictures, like background and we're going to talk a little bit about birds in flight. It won't be a detailed dive into birds in flight, but most things I do in photography, I think about them all in pretty simple terms. And the reason why I think about things in pretty simple terms is because if I make it too complicated, I tend to forget stuff when I'm in the field. When things get exciting and the action heats up, I tend to forget. And I think if you'll be honest with yourself, I think if I could see everyone in the audience today and have a show of hands, I think you'd agree too that you get excited about stuff and you tend to start messing up. So I really take a simplistic approach, even birds in flight. The setting I'm going to show you today, whenever I talk about that stuff, and I was looking at it this morning when I was finalizing this presentation. I look at the things I talk about and I'm thinking, is that really all? And it really is. I try to make everything really, really simple, not only for my benefit, but hopefully for your benefit. And really a lot of photography, not just bird photography, but wildlife photography or people photography or grandkids photography. It's all sort of wash, rinse, and repeat. You find that path that works good for you. And when you can find success with whatever path, and when I say path, the focus mode you use or the type of photography you like to do or the lenses you like best, when you find that path for you and it worked for you, you just repeat those same simple steps every single time. So a lot of what we'll talk about today is kind of based on that simple premise that I teach a lot about. If you happen to be a member of the Journal of Wildlife Photography and you're on that webinar tonight that I'm doing called Mastering Tricky Exposures, you're going to notice the same thing too. I take a pretty simple approach to all this stuff on how to figure it out and how to think about it and how to solve some of these vexing photographic problems that we all have. So here we go. I always like to start off with a few pretty bird pictures. To me, I mean, like I said earlier, the beautiful thing about birds is just the variety of colors you find. Even the plain gray birds like sandhill cranes, I love those guys. Uh, I love all of God's creatures. So if I have a chance to take pictures of it, I'm going to take pictures of it, no matter what kind of bird it is. But I put the cardinal in here because cardinals are plentiful and they're people see them in their backyards everywhere and they're pretty special birds. So one of the things I tell people all the time is think about backgrounds. And what I mean by that is this picture right here is kind of the epitome of what I like to see in the background, me personally. Now, this varies on what your aesthetic is, but to give you a little bit of background, why I developed this aesthetic is because when I first started, if you've heard my story before, you'll have to bear with me for just about a minute. It's not going to be a long story. But when I first started wanting to do photography back when I was a teenager, I was really gravitated. I wanted to be a magazine photographer. I was really excited about the prospect of doing that. And and so, because of that, part of magazine photography is you got to think about when you compose pictures and you think about backgrounds, you got to think about dead space where they're going to put words on top of the picture, whether it's a magazine cover or whether it's like a double page spread inside. And so, this one technique about thinking about backgrounds, I really latched onto pretty early because that's what I wanted to do. And I lost count. And I'm gonna brag on myself a little bit, but I don't mean to overtly brag on myself a little bit. But about 600 magazine covers later, I've kind of got that dialed in, and that's still the aesthetic that I learned 30 years ago how to do. I still try to incorporate it today when I'm doing bird photography or any other kind of wildlife photography. Is I'm constantly thinking about the background and trying to pre-plan the background and what it's going to look like. And so, uh, to me, backgrounds are an integral part of any great photo. Like this picture here, this is a common nighthawk sitting on a barbed wire fence. Uh, the reason why I like this background is I like that gradient of color that goes kind of a complementary color to that. It's a matching color to the nighthawk on the tree, that vegetation in the background. It's just a swath of color there that's just so out of focus. You know what it is instinctively, but you can't tell what it is, and that color kind of graduates from that brown into the blue sky behind it. And to me, I love that. And so, to me, the reason why I think about backgrounds all the time is because what this bullet point says to me, they're an integral part. They're not as important as the subject, but they're pretty dang important in my mind. And so, uh, if you don't know this, if you know this, you know. If you don't know it, this is going to be, or if you forgot it, this is a good catch up for you. But backgrounds, the way that the out of focus backgrounds, the way I like them, are a function of the lens you use. So in other words, if you try to get a background like this in a 16 millimeter lens, you can accomplish it, but you got to be an inch away from the subject. So the way you accomplish backgrounds like this, of course, when we're talking about birds, you're almost always using a telephoto. I'm not going to say always because I try to figure out ways to shoot all kinds of animals with wide angle lenses, but primarily you shoot telephotos to get backgrounds like this. So backgrounds like this are a function of the lens you use, the camera mode you use in a way, and I say that because if you shoot shutter priority where you're shooting well, no, it'll do the same thing. I don't even know why I said that, but the camera mode you use has an influence on it depending on how you shoot manual or aperture or shutter priority, but it's all dependent upon the next thing is the aperture you choose. And so to get a background like that, you've got to have the lens wide open. if you've ever been on a trip with me before, you know I still carry an old lens. It's way too heavy. It weighs a ton. I hate how much it weighs, but it gives me the backgrounds that are really, really, really nice. It's a 500 millimeter f4. If anyone has any connections with Canon at all, I wish you would contact them and tell them to upgrade that lens to the newer materials they use to make that lens lighter because it's such a beautiful lens. But you don't have to have an exotic lens like that to be able to take pictures like we're talking about. Uh, Hang on, we still got people trying to come in. Let everybody in right quick. There we go. You don't have to have an exotic lens like that to take pictures like I'm talking about. You can do it with, I know a lot of people use like the 150 to 600 millimeter, like a Tamron or Sigma, and a lot of people use like the 1 to 500, and I know 2 to 600, like a 6.3 that Sony has. I forget. I know Nikon has a similar like 150 to 500 or 150 to 600 that are 6.3. Mine's an f4, but you don't have to have f4 because if you've got that if you'll think about these things I'll talk about, that you can achieve these things at f6.3 at f8. I've got a lens that Canon made. I shoot Canon cameras, of course, uh, for no other reason other than that's just what I shoot. All the cameras are good, but I've got a Canon came out with a 600 no 800 millimeter f11. And you may think, well, how can you get backgrounds like this at f11? If you'll be careful about how you line yourself up on the subject, I'll talk about that in a minute. You can still achieve similar results even with like an 800 millimeter f11. And so this one of the things that you've always got to be thinking about backgrounds and how you line yourself up with the subject to be able to get these soft, creamy backgrounds. And backgrounds are a function of the distance between the subject and the background. It's pretty simple. And so here's my simple diagram I built for y'all. And so if you've got and I'll show you some real world examples in a minute. If you've got a short relative distance between the subject and the background won't be nearly as out of focus. And I know you can't always tell an animal which way to move or a bird which way to move, but I'll talk about a simple strategy here in a minute that I know for a fact that some people don't think about because as I take people on workshops, it's one of the things that I remind people of all the time because it doesn't come instinctive to you, the little trick I'll talk about. And so as the distance between the subject and the background increases, the background becomes more blurry. I'm not an optical physicist. I can't tell you the reason why that happens, but if you shoot a wide open aperture like f4, f5.6, f6.3, and your subject is a long way from the background, the further that background is away in relation to the subject, the more out of focus it's going to be. So in other words, if you've got a backyard feeder and you're trying to plan out your shoot with some birds, if you can get as close as you can to that feeder and then the background from the feeder is relatively far off, you can accomplish backgrounds like we're talking about, the real soft, real creamy backgrounds. Here's a good example here. If you look at this picture here of this barred owl, this is right here on Hackberry Farm. If you look at this picture here, he's sitting in this cedar tree and the background is relatively close behind him. So if you notice, the background is not very much out of focus. And if you look at this next picture, another barred owl here on Hackberry Farm, and I put this in here on purpose because you notice the limbs immediately behind this bird is a lot more out of focus as it is with this one because like we said, as the background gets further away from the subject, the background becomes more blurry. So I put this picture in here on purpose because if you look at the limb right behind his neck, it's kind of out of focus, but if you look at the limb right at the top of his head, that limb's further back, it's even more out of focus. And so that helps illustrate it. I've got another picture I'll illustrate that for in a minute. So on this picture, the background is just further away from the subject, so the background becomes more and more out of focus. And would you believe that both of these pictures were shot at f5.6? That picture and that picture both were shot with the exact same aperture on my camera. But again, because the background is close to the subject, it doesn't go very far out of focus. But the further it gets away from the subject, the blurrier the background gets. Here's another good example here. I'm going to call out Ray. He's in the audience. I saw him pop in earlier, but Ray has been to this spot before. In fact, I might have been standing next to Ray when I took this picture. So I've got this spot here on the farm. It's just right outside the barn here. I call it the world's most famous hummingbird stick. I've got a stick just mounted next to a feeder that people, when they come out here for my day camp I do on hummingbirds, they all land. Everybody takes a picture of the stick because I've got the stick strategically placed where the background is a long way away from the subject. And so you can get this soft, creamy background. Everyone that shows up can get that. But this was from a different angle. They're going into the same feeder where the stick is, but this picture of these female ruby-throated hummingbirds is from a different angle. And I included this one in there to really give you a stark contrast of the further the background is away from the subject, the blurrier it gets, because you've got the hummingbird here in the foreground that's really tack sharp focus. You've got one right behind her that may have been less than a foot away, and she's got enough shape to her uh, that she's out of focus. But the further you get away, and all that blurriness around them is just the pasture in the background, and it looks terrible with that brown color. But uh, I've been, as an aside, I've been doing a native grass reclamation project on my property, and so in order to start over again, I had to kill all the grass that was existing to get rid of all the introduced grasses and start over with native. So this was late last summer, right after I'd killed all the native grasses, so everything is brown. I mean, right after I'd killed all the introduced grasses, so everything in the background is brown. But that's actually grass in the background. That's why I put Ray on the spot. If Ray could talk, Ray would tell you the setup I'm telling you about is exactly true. That's not an artificial background. That's not anything that I did in the computer. That's a function of how close I was to the subject and how far the background was away from the subject. And that's the way you accomplish it. If I'd have shot that at f11, I could have accomplished the same thing. And so it's just a matter of trying to get everything lined up right. And so the strategy is sometimes changing the background on your subject only requires you to move slightly. So that's what I was talking about earlier. You can't go out and say, I can't go out and tell this little blue heron, hey, can you move a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right? But what I can do is I can move myself. And oftentimes it's only moving yourself a couple of feet to the right, a couple of feet to the left, or even setting down and getting lower. And that's real effective if you can just get lower a lot of times, because if you're shooting down on an animal, the background, if you think about the angle, is relatively close to the subject. But if you can sit down and lower your angle, then the background becomes further and further back. And so, again, to change the background, well, I can go back and show you a lot of these pictures on what I did. Like the Nighthawk picture we started this part off with. Uh, I was in my vehicle driving around, and so I shot it out the window of a vehicle, and all I had to do to change my background is to creep up on it slowly. Again, a lot of times it's subtle. Move 1 foot, you move a couple of feet one way, move a couple of feet another. It doesn't change the lighting on the subject, but it affects the background. And the example is this one right here. So this little blue heron, he's got kind of, it's not a bad background, but kind of a busy background behind him. But by moving, oops, a little bit away, a little bit off to the side, I can't see that because it's covered up by my Zoom stuff. But you can see I moved just a little bit where the background was cleaner behind it. And I can tell you, when I shot this picture, I might not have moved 2 or 3 feet to one side and was able to just change the background. So that's an important thing. That's one of those things beyond the basics that you can think about, because a lot of people, and I don't blame them, I was the same way. And I don't mean to be demeaning to anybody if this has kind of been your standard practice at all, because we all learn and we're all in different phases of our learning. But I'm everything I'm talking about to think about is something I'm guilty of the opposite of at some point. And so when you and so a lot of times I'll remind people, we may be on a workshop, and I did it here when we were in Florida for when we took these pictures, is that you get locked into one spot and you're trying to think about all those different things about the bird, trying to get them in focus and exposure's right and everything else. But again, think about the background, and sometimes you just may have to move a little bit to improve the background. And you improve the background, and the whole picture is going to improve. And by the way, I think it says it in here, but let me. Oops. Yeah, there's the data on this right here. I don't think I included the ISO, but both of these are 1/32 32 hundredths of a second, and they're both at f5.6. So same settings, nothing changed. Same shutter speed, nothing changed. I don't shoot auto ISO for a variety of reasons, but I'm not, if you wonder why, I can tell you later, but it's not really part of the talk on the auto ISO. But that's the setting. So nothing changed other than my angle to the bird. Make sense? Awesome. Yeah, so one of my favorite things to do, and I don't, maybe it speaks to my overall laziness, but I haven't done it as much lately just because I haven't done it as much lately just because I've just been busy with other things. But one of my favorite things to do, and it's so effective of a technique to do, and this isn't an official part of this talk, but it may help you out, is I've got one of those bean bags that goes on that you use to steady your camera. And I love driving around in a vehicle early in the morning and down a country road and looking for birds like this one, just sitting on a barbed wire fence and this one happens to have a big old green caterpillar in its mouth and big old fat caterpillar in its mouth and just to be able to shoot pictures like that. When my kids were little, I used to do it all the time because I didn't have as much time to do photography as I wanted to do because first and foremost to me, it was more important for me to be a good father to my children. And so I didn't travel that much back when they were younger. I traveled some, but not a whole lot back when they were younger. And so I would get my photography fix in on when I would wake, Saturday mornings when all of them wanted to sleep in. I would get up early in the morning and we lived out in the country. So I had this benefit of being able to do this. I'd make a big loop down these country roads and would loop my way back to town eventually, uh, buy them all breakfast in town, like donuts or whatever, and then make my way back home and be home about 9:30 about the time they were getting up. So I get a couple hours of photography in, and that's all it was. I would just creep around back roads, particularly in the spring when the birds get really active. I would I would I would try to take pictures like this. And so since we're coming into spring, that's why I thought this would be a particularly good topic to talk about today. And I'm gonna check if you've got any questions in the chat, just keep them coming. I'll get to kind of a natural break later on and check those. But again, that picture of a bobwhite quail, love those birds too. I mean, they're to me they're beautiful birds. They're like a lot of grassland birds. They're imperiled. That's why I'm doing my whole grassland restoration project. I really want to put my money where my mouth is. If I'm talking about conservation and wildlife, there's nothing that thrills me more than be able to do shots in literally my front yard. Uh, but that's why I'm doing the in conjunction with the United States Department of or the United States Natural Resource Conservation Service. We're doing a reclamation project and taking an old hayfield that was a monoculture, reintroducing native grasses, hopefully to the benefit of grassland birds. And so we'll be able to take more pictures, kind of like we're seeing here. But again, you keep looking at the barbed wire fence and all these pictures. I did it the same way, just cruising around thinking about the backgrounds. And to me, these are again is just if every picture I could ever take has a background like that, then I'm pretty happy with myself. Another thing to think about beside backgrounds, and again, the backgrounds are to me super important. And I can tell you this: if you don't take away anything from backgrounds, but this, if you compete in camera club competitions, and I judge a lot of those camera club competitions, if you if you just do it for those, because that's one of the things I really think about. You can have a really good picture of a bird. You can have two really good pictures of a bird, and it could be like the barred owl I showed you a while ago. All the both those pictures kind of check the boxes. Let me go back and I'll show you that. Both those pictures kind of check the boxes. I mean, it's in focus, the exposure's right, it's it's composed well enough. But if I'm a judge and I'm judging myself here, if I'm a judge between and this is my opinion, and you may disagree, and that's great. But between that picture and that picture there, that to me, that picture is the better picture than that one, just because the background is got some interest to it. It's kind of more of a 3D look. The uh, the the uh, the bird really stands up across the background. Hey, let me just pause and say this for a second. We've had a bunch of people kind of check in late, and so if you're one of those, don't worry. I am recording this webinar, so you'll get a full recording, within an hour or two, hopefully, after this presentation's over. So if you feel like you missed something, you'll be able to go back and watch it again. And I'm going to try to new. I'm not going to tell you too much about it in case it doesn't work, but I've got a new feature I'm trying to use with these webinars as well. I'll just tell you a little bit about it. But if it doesn't come through, it was my fault. But aside from the video, I've also got a meeting summary that this system's taking notes for me. So I'll send everything out in written form. So that way, if you want to watch the video and print out the notes and kind of keep up and take notes along as you go back through this, I think it'll be a good resource for helping you learn some of the lessons that we're talking about today. Uh, Consider behavior. That's a big thing. One of so I wouldn't. I would, or even early on and now, I would never say about myself that I'm one of the best photographers in the world because I'm not. I mean, there's people that do this uh, so much better than I can do. They have so much more of a vision. But one of the things that really I take pride in along those lines is early on, when I first got started and I had limited budget and limited equipment, I just, because I grew up in the country and I grew up around animals all the time, I just kind of had a sense on the behavior of animals, and I developed a knack, and that's probably one of my best things I ever developed was just could figure out how to get close to stuff. You know, I knew the simple terms like, or the simple things like, uh, you may or may not have heard this, but it's absolutely true. Before birds take off, they're going to poop, and most of the time. And so, if you're waiting to try to get a bird's in flight shot, and there's a hawk, and I just watch one take off across the pasture, if there's a hawk sitting on a limb, if he takes a poop, he's about to take off. Bald eagles, same way, just about every bird. And I guess it's instinctual to lighten their load, literally. And so they're always going to poop before they take off. So that's one of the things about behavior that I try to watch for. Another thing about behavior when it comes to birds and trying to shoot like birds in flight is they almost always take off and land into the wind. They're no different than an airliner you may fly on. Commercial airliners always take into account which way's the wind blowing, and they're going to take off and land into the wind. And the reason for that is it helps increase their lift. They're more efficient to do what they do. And so, aside from that, just simple kind of behavior 101 on birds, also try to think about a lot of other things, like one of the things for Redlands Ranch I've really been trying to solve the puzzle on is how do I get roadrunners to show up more? Because we have a lot of roadrunners out there and they'll show up about every day, but they're so unpredictable when they do. So how can you make them where they show up more? I haven't cracked that code yet, but that's one of the things I do because if I can solve that behavior, if I can figure that whole thing out, it's just going to make me more and more successful. Has nothing to do with my technical skills because the technical skills are a given. But if you consider behavior and you try to operate and figure out how birds work, it just stacks the odds in your favor. I won't go too far into this because this is a whole other webinar in itself. But one of the things I talk about a lot in terms of photography, and I try to do, and I encourage everyone else to try to do it. There's when it comes to nature photography is challenging all on its own. And so we accept it because it is challenging, but at the same time, we all want to take cool pictures of what we're trying to take pictures of. And it becomes a little bit frustrating when you go out time and time and time again and you just keep striking out. I mean, I'm guilty of it. And because even though you accept that's part of the game, you still want to try to take good pictures of stuff. And so one of the things that I really think about all the time is I try to control all the variables I can to the point that I can't control them. And if I can do that, if I can control all the variables I can to the point I can't control them, my satisfaction level tends to go way, way up. So, in other words, the variables I can control is I know how to do things like think about backgrounds. I know how to do that. I know how to control my camera. I know what's going to happen is if I change my ISO and I kind of know what to expect on all that. So I've got good command of my camera equipment. I know how to use it. That's one of the things I can control. Uh, I consider behavior. If I want to take pictures of those great egrets fishing, got to go where great egrets live, where I'm going to see them. So I can kind of think about behavior and control that, and control and increase my odds of being able to shoot pictures of a marsh hawk or a bald eagle by just frequenting those places that I think I'm going to see them. And so at some point, if you learn the camera part and you learn behavior part, at some point it comes down to the fact that is the animal going to show up? And if it does, great. If it doesn't, then that's kind of okay too, because I've done everything I could to prepare myself to put myself in a good place to be successful. And so considering behaviors is absolutely one of those things. Now, a lot of knowledge that people like me and other people have is kind of a lifetime of observation and being out in it. And I know, and I get it. Not everybody can do that. And I mean, everybody can learn it, but not everybody has, you're working or you got kids or grandkids and you can't always be out in it. But the internet is a good resource for learning a lot of those things that you don't have to necessarily go out and experience firsthand. But one strategy I try to tell people all the time is if you'll if you really want to start kind of learning this process of learning behavior and how behavior influences your success as a photographer, how animal behavior influences your success as a photographer, then just pick one or two species. Pick cardinals in your backyard, for example, and try to, how can you do a setup for those cardinals where you can put the background far away, you know what to feed them during the winter time, you can do all those things and check the boxes from a technical standpoint, and then you start working backwards from there. You get a picture of a male cardinal, and you get a picture of a female cardinal. Maybe you get pictures of those scruffy young ones then when they first leave the nest. And before you know it, because you spend a little time understanding the life history of a cardinal, you've got a pretty good portfolio of everything that cardinals are going to do. And so, and when you do it on one animal, it's pretty easy to kind of use that same pattern and jump time and again to other animals. These are all, because if you understand a little bit of behavior, you put yourself in a position to catch a crane fight. This is in Bosque del Apache. A lot of people go there, and it's a cool spot. And if you pay attention, those birds are famously cantankerous with one another, and they're always sparring like that. Another reason I went out to Redlands Ranch this week is because it's the early days of when turkeys are feeling kind of amorous. They're looking for love, and the males are out strutting. Now, this picture wasn't taken when I was out at Redlands Ranch this week. This was taken probably about 5 or 6 years ago. But there's a specific time and a place when those turkeys, when you're going to see them doing this behavior, the strutting behavior in earnest. Same way with the lesser prairie chickens. Prairie chickens are, when you start learning about them, you realize that they go to a place called a lek, which is kind of their breeding grounds. They go to the same place every single year. And so if you know that and you're looking for a place to photograph prairie chickens, that's what kind of, they're going to be in a specific spot. And in a specific time of year, like in the spring in April, it's when you're going to find them doing their little dance like that. They may do it, like turkeys will strut really all year from time to time, but the consistent behavior, I know that from observation, just from learning about them, the consistent behavior for turkey strutting is going to occur in late March to late May. And so, because of that, you put yourself in a position. I know how to use the camera. I put myself where I know turkeys are found, and the only thing that's left is, are the turkeys going to show up and strut? And if they don't, then you see all the other cool stuff along the way. And so, again, that's why behavior is so important. I include this picture because this is my favorite. Another piece of behavior I learned, if I'm not a very good whistler, but if I'll do this one kind of crappy one tone whistle, it makes turkeys gobble. And if you've never seen me do that before, I'm gonna pick on you again, Ray. You're gonna be with me in a couple weeks in the Smoky Mountains, and make sure I try to get the turkeys to talk back to you, because I can make turkeys do this almost every single time. And so my variables here, I knew where the turkeys are gonna be strutting, because turkeys have these zones that they'll strut in, and they'll go to the same place every day. And I knew where he'd be strutting. I knew where I was going to set up a blind to sit in and photograph him. Uh, I hoped he was going to show up in this shaft of light. I knew, because of the tricky exposure, how to set the camera. And this is a tricky exposure, by the way. I knew how to set the camera. And so really all I had to do was wait for the turkey to get there. Hopefully I would whistle at him, but I had everything else sort of prepared. So when I whistled at him, he'd gobble like this, and it all, I don't do a lot of things right, but that morning I did this right, and it's just, that's why I include that picture, because it's such a good memory for me and such a neat story. And that's the cool thing. I've said this before. If you listen to me in my webinars, that's such a cool thing about photography is this thing will happen similarly again sometime. It's happened sometime in the past, and it's happened sometime in the future. But this one thousandth of a second will never, it had never happened before in this moment in time, and will never happen again. And I happen to be there to capture it. And that's, to me, that's what makes photography so special. And then another thing, get low. And I can, again, everything I say, I'm guilty of too. I can hear myself now saying that. And it's easy to say, but time has a way of making getting low a little bit tougher on all of us. I mean, your bones start to creak, and it's harder to get it up and down off the ground. But whenever you can, and I say get low, not necessarily laying on the ground, but anytime you can get eye level with that bird, it's always going to be a more dynamic picture. I think it just helps people when they look at the picture, including you and me, helps them connect better. This particular picture on the right is of another common nighthawk. They are ground nesters, and so I found a place where there was a lot of them. Uh, Found a few nests, but they just kind of hung out in this. It was by a cotton field, and it was just, again, going back to understanding your subject. I'm doing the mental gymnastics in my head, And I know a certain time of the year out in cotton country, this cotton moth kind of descends on these fields that for ages farmers used to fight them, but that's not such an issue anymore. But the moths are still there when they're flying through, and it's usually like late July and August. And because I knew that, my first thought was, I wonder if I go out to this cotton field, will there be nighthawks flying around because they fly around and they catch insects while they're flying. They're really good for mosquitoes. And it's the same, by the way, if you don't know nighthawk, if you live in the South, it's a similar bird to the whippoorwill. Not the same bird as the whippoorwill, but they're a nightjar in the same nightjar family. So my whole thought was, if I go out there, I wonder if there'll be any nighthawks. Well, it turns out there was five or six, and I was able to photograph them. But I also found a nest on the ground, and when I found the nest that had a baby in it, I thought Mama's got to be somewhere near, and they're so camouflaged, and I found her. And if I and I should have put pictures in here to show you to include it. But if I was to photograph at a down angle from her, she almost blends in with the background and you really couldn't see her. So in order to solve that, I just got low. Now the beautiful thing about cameras today are, I was telling someone this not long ago. It wasn't too long ago that in order to shoot low pictures, you had to buy an adapter for your camera called an angle finder that was like a little scope you look down in because it would allow you to look down in your camera and get it at a low angle. But now with these articulating screens that you can put the screen in almost any configuration. I'll show you an example. I think I've got it in here. If I've got it in here, I'll show you an example of where I did that with the screen just not long ago. But it helps getting low a lot easier. You don't necessarily have to lay on the ground anymore. You can set your camera on the ground and then still kneel beside it without you having to get all the way on the ground. And it just makes it so much more versatile. But getting low, again, the lower you get, the more eye level you get with the animal, it kind of forces that background further away and you get those soft, creamy backgrounds like that. And so, like I said, best rule of thumb is if you can be at eye level with the bird, these are kind of the dynamic shots you get. It's just to me, they're a lot more engaging than looking down on anything at all. It kind of puts you in the world with the animals, like this crane picture. If I'd have been any higher than what I am with this crane picture, uh, it to me it wouldn't have packed the punch that it does. But here, you're kind of in the fight with those birds, and it's pretty cool looking at them that way. And even the I know I keep talking about Redlands Ranch. I don't want to sound like a commercial when I say that. I don't mean to sound that way at all, but because I built that blind down in the ground, and when the animals come to the water hole, like that quail is, you're able to get eye level shots with the bird that's 6 inches tall, and it's you don't have to lay down. You're standing up in the blind, and so it's just to me it's so much more of an intimate. And I hate using that word, but that's the best word I can think of. It's so much more of an intimate view of looking at not only birds but all kinds of wildlife. And that's not quite at eye level, but it's pretty close. Uh, and so, but that's I'm sitting on the side of the pond in a little blind when I shot that picture. But again, it's better than standing up on that angle. And so, as promised, birds in flight. We'll talk about that just a little bit. Birds in flight. That's kind of the holy grail of bird photography. The good news is these modern cameras have made it so much easier. I can look back and remember there was a time when I wouldn't even try attempt a birds in flight photograph because I'll do the chronology here. I probably got my first camera in 86 or 87. I was in high school. And back then, if you've been shooting pictures for a long time, some of y'all can appreciate this. Everything was manual. It was manual settings on the camera. If it had any kind of auto mode, it's usually aperture priority. But the lenses were manual focus, and everything just moved slow. And so, and you shot everything on film, and so it stung to mess up. It just, it costs money every time you messed up on something. And so early on, I'd never even attempt birds in flight. And then as autofocus got better and better, we're still shooting film though. I still really didn't attempt it that much because still it stung. I remember the first time I ever went to Bosque del Apache in New Mexico was the last time I ever used digital cameras. And I'm gonna tell you, and I can remember this. It was 2004 was the last year I used digital photography, but I went to Bosque del Apache out in New Mexico and shot a load of film. And the autofocus was good enough where I could kind of be successful, but I wasn't nearly as successful as I wanted to be because more often than not, the uh, the the composition would be off or something like that. Because shooting birds in flight is hard. And then all of a sudden next year, because in late this year, August of 2025, it will mark the 20th anniversary of me picking up using my first digital camera. And I know that because I was thinking about this not too long ago, and I remember Canon loaned me their Canon 20D. I think it was like 6.3 megapixels. And that camera, because I was trying to decide if the quality was good. Because at the time, you had people saying, "Oh, the quality is not what film is." And I used that camera from Canon, and I took a picture of my daughter when she was 4 years old. It was right before her fourth fourth birthday. I took a picture of her, and I made it into a 20 by 30 enlargement, and it looked great. And so when I saw that, that's when I decided, and she's 24 now, so or she'll be 24 this year. So that's when I decided that I was gonna switch to digital. And so once I switched to digital and I got away from film, the autofocus was still just as good. But now all of a sudden it's like playing slot, I'm not a gambler, but the best I can think of is like going to a casino and playing slot machines, but the casino's letting you use their money. It doesn't cost anything to lose. And so then my birds in flight went way, way up, and I really enjoyed it. And because it doesn't cost anything to mess up. So a lot of people ask me handheld or tripod. This is where technology's improving because back in the day, I'd almost always say tripod. Anytime you got a big lens and you're shooting telephoto, put it on a tripod. But I'll concede that the tripod, I think, in some cases is necessary, but in a lot of cases it's not. If you've got a bird like this mallard, blue skies and plenty of light, I don't know because of the in body and the lens stabilization. I don't know that you need a tripod anymore. I still tend to use a tripod because I do think it's a good practice and it's one of those things that'll help you a lot in your photography. But if birds in flight, when things are happening quick and you're shooting in short bursts, I think if you've got plenty of light, you don't necessarily need a tripod much anymore. But I think it's always important to think about stabilization and how to handle that, how to handle your camera and using proper camera handling techniques. And then basic camera settings on birds in flight. I shoot aperture priority. That's why I put an asterisk by there because early on, I've been shooting that way for a long time. And the reason why I shoot aperture priority because I care about the aperture because of what we talked about the backgrounds earlier. I want to set the aperture and I'll set the ISO and then the camera, I'll let it set the shutter speed. And the, the meters today are pretty good and they'll get it close most all the time. I'm going to go into detail tonight on that webinar I'm going to do tonight, but I like aperture priority. And the reason why I like aperture priority more than anything, when you talk about aperture priority or shutter priority or manual priority or manual mode, it's to me, that discussion is about as trivial as if I were to put a dot on a map and say I want to go from here to Chicago, Illinois, for example, Google Maps is going to give me three routes, but all three routes get me to the same place. And that's I think is about as trivial as what the mode is. I'm more focused on people figuring out what mode works best for you. If that's manual, wash, rinse, and repeat. Be good at it every single time. If it's aperture, like I like to use, just be good at it. If it's shutter, be good at that. Master whatever mode you choose to use. Understand why it works and exploit it to its fullest. The reason why I use aperture has more to do with me than it does where I think it's the best mode because I can set the aperture to get those really out of focus backgrounds. I'll set the ISO. I'll let the camera decide. What the shutter speed ought to be. And I do it that way simply because that gives me one less button to turn and one less thing to mess up when I'm in the field, when action's happening really quick. And that's how I learned it. And also it's how I learned to do it a long time ago and which made me the most efficient way to shoot. So that's what I keep doing today. Here's really the key thing, and a lot of people don't even know their cameras have this, but when you're shooting birds in flight, the telephoto lens that you use, more often than not, I can't speak to every single telephoto ever made, but most of the ones I've seen have a little button on the side of the lens that's a focus limiter. And so, in other words, what it'll do is, like the lens I use has three modes, but a lot of lenses have two, where they'll focus from the close focus that the lens will do all the way to infinity. And then they'll have another mode that you can switch it to that'll say like it'll do 10 meters to infinity. And the reason why that focus limiter is important, if the lens isn't trying to focus from its very close point it'll focus to infinity, the lens has to travel a lot less to obtain focus. So in other words, if you pick whatever that second setting is that goes from say 10 meters to infinity, the internal mechanism of that lens barely has to even turn to acquire autofocus. And so we've all seen it before when your lens is hunting, try to find focus, it'll go all the way out to infinity, all the way back in. Well, you limit all of that travel. when you set the focus limiter. And so when you're doing birds in flight, it just makes that lens and that camera setting become a lot more efficient at getting the bird in focus. And you've got a whole lot more keepers after that. Again, that's something I learned by doing, and I learned it the hard way because I was getting a bunch of misses. And then I realized, oh, I've got this focus limiter on my camera. My camera's trying to work, or my lens is trying to work too hard to acquire focus. I'm just going to use the built-in setting of my lens and let it fix itself. Now, as a word of warning, I do this all the time. If you use focus limiter and you go back to shooting something else, you need to remember to change everything back to like it was, because I may be shooting birds in flight using focus limiter, and my lens will do 15 meters to infinity. Then all of a sudden, a bird lands right in front of you that's 10 meters away, and then you try to focus, it won't focus on that 10 meters unless you switch that lens back where it'll focus from close focus to infinity. So, but that of all the things I'm telling you right now, that's to me, that's the big tip right there is focus limiting. And then the ISO varies. It's hard to say which ISO is the best. It all is situational, but in general, I know we have tools that will help us clean the noise up, but in general, I like to try to get as much stuff right as I can in camera. So if it's a bright morning like this with this marsh hawk flying by, I may shoot it like ISO 400. My sweet spot is usually between 400 and 800. I think that I can do the best job, but I'm not afraid to go to 3200 or higher if I need to from time to time. And then burst mode. Shooting birds in flight is like a war of attrition. You just want to take a lot of pictures and hope and put the numbers in your own favor. Uh, because I know it's a lot of pictures to go through, but if you set your camera at the highest burst mode it'll do, like I know like my Canon, I mean like my Canon R5s, they'll shoot, or the Mark IIs, I think they'll do 30 frames a second. But I know like a Canon Z9, I know it affect. I know I don't know the top rate, but I know that some of those cameras will go up to like 120 frames a second. But it affects the quality of the image. I think you got to shoot at a lower JPEG. But whatever that max rate you can shoot at the raw settings that you like to use, then that's where I set it and just take a lot of pictures. Because again, it's sort of a war of attrition after that. And so a few best practices for birds in flight. I like to do this. I like to pick a bird early. So if you're somewhere where there's a lot of geese or sandhill cranes or whatever flying in, I try not to focus on all the other birds around me. I'll find a bird that's flying towards me, pick it early, and then I stick with that bird the whole way. Despite what's around me, I try not to pay attention to that. And the reason why that's important is because again, you're letting the camera work less to achieve better results. So if you pick a bird early and the camera locks in on it, it's a lot easier for that camera to stay focused on that bird that's flying right towards you, as opposed to trying to pick up another bird that's at a different distance somewhere else. And so again, find one bird, pick it early, let it fly towards you, and then stay with it till it's just not with it anymore. And so that's what I mean by here. Track the bird until the end. Track the same bird until the end. And then at the end, once that bird flies past or turns or wherever else, look out, pick another bird, but stick with the same bird. Being manic and trying to go from one bird to the next bird to the next bird, it's if you've ever done that before, it's almost an exercise in futility. You can get lucky from time to time, but I really do think that picking a bird and picking a bird early is probably the best way of practicing that. And then, like I said before, shoot lots and lots and lots of images. It's that's important because using my analogy before, it doesn't cost
Setting up smart
it'll cost you a little
watering.
time in the end to it'll cost you a little time in the end uh to go through the pictures, but you'll have a lot more keepers if you just shoot a lot of birds. So, with that said, I've got my big announcement coming up. I told you guys. I mean, if you're with me this long, you might as well stick through to talk about for me to tell you about a couple things that's coming up here in the near future. But if you have any questions, I haven't checked the chat yet. But if you have any questions, feel free to turn your mic on, ask those questions. If not, I've lost there we go. I've lost the chat box. Oh, it's just people saying hello there. Oh, so Charlotte asked, here's a question in the chat. Charlotte asked, what about manual mode with auto ISO? The reason, and unless it's changed, and this may be my ignorance, so I will say that the reason why I've never been a big fan of auto ISO is because a lot of times in nature photography that you may have to compensate. like with the way I shoot. Now, I don't think it's that way with manual mode. But in aperture priority, if I have to use the exposure compensation to do like a -1 or a +1 to adjust to whatever the scene is to get the correct exposure, auto ISO tries to outrun that, and so it'll constantly change itself. And so I may dial in a -1, but then the auto ISO will change itself to compensate for what the camera thinks that I'm doing wrong. Because if you think about your meters in your camera, it's the classic example of shooting pictures on snow. If you shoot pictures on the snow, your camera will try to your camera will suggest you make this you put the set the meter in the middle at 0. That's proper technique. But we've all shot pictures in the snow where the snow ends up being kind of gray and muddy looking and dull looking. Well, the problem is the camera is trying to meter everything to 18% gray is what the cameras are taught to do. And so you've got to outthink the camera and then overexpose in that particular instance. And so I found with auto ISO, if when I'm shooting an aperture priority, even when I try to dial it in, the camera will sort of compensate against my compensation to try to bring it back to that 18% gray mode, and doesn't let me uh, overexpose it like I know it needs to be overexposed. And I don't, you might can try that, and that'd be a good thing for me to know. I don't know if it works the same way in manual mode, but I think it does. So with the way I shoot, that's why I've just never been a fan of auto ISO. I mean, it's easy to change the ISO. I can do it myself. Uh, and so I tend not to. I mean, I can just change the ISO easy enough. And so William asked if you shoot aperture priority, won't the shutter speed get too low at times and give you blurry photos of fast moving birds? That can happen, William, but you just raise the ISO at that point and just try to shoot it wherever you think you need to be at to get the results you want. So, for example, you can shoot birds on shutter priority, and that's what a lot of people teach, and that's not a wrong way to teach it at all. Again, it's to me, it's as trivial as three different routes to go from your house to the grocery store. All three will get you to the grocery store, and they'll probably get you there in the same amount of time. It's just whatever route you like best. And so you can shoot on shutter priority and set the shutter speed where the camera sets the aperture, and then you set the ISO, and you can guarantee a minimum shutter speed. But you can do the same thing. So my 2 point steps I do on that, William, when shooting aperture priority, again, because like this picture here you're seeing on the screen, I really like the look of the wide open aperture. So I default to what the background is going to look like first, and then if the shutter speed's getting too low, I just raise the ISO up and the camera will compensate for it. And if not, I'll just, then I'll try to use the proper camera handling techniques of a tripod or whatever else. Because you'll find, even in wildlife photography, birds or otherwise, that if you've got a good steady rest, you can get by with a lot of stuff, even at slower shutter speeds than what you may imagine. You can get sharp pictures at pretty slow shutter speeds if you have good technique, and that's a whole other webinar in itself. So, uh, does anybody else have any questions at all? Like I said, if you can hear me and you got a question you want to ask, you might want to turn your mic on if you're trying to ask, because I know a lot of people I'm looking right now have their mics turned off, and I'll give it like if you come up with a question, let me move this aside. Let me know, and I think the next slide is my big announcements that I think you might want to hear. I'm pretty excited about. By the way, I'll say this. I've taken a lot of pictures of bobwhite quail in my life, and that right now, that's my current favorite. That to me, that one checks all the boxes. Eye level, background's beautiful. The light is beautiful on this picture, and he's walking. That's a harder picture than what you'd think to get, is getting the picture of one walking towards you, because most of the time they're always kind of walking, skirting, parallel to you or walking away from you. But to get one walking at you like that, and to me, get that pose and that head turn, I really like that. But that's not the big announcement. Big announcement is if you've ever been on one of my workshops before, I think you'll agree we have a heck of a good time, and we have a lot of fun there. So, but again, this isn't a big announcement. If you're looking for a place to do a photo workshop, I think the way we do things is we're on to something good. They're all inclusive. All you got to do is get yourself to the meeting spot and back home from the meeting spot. I take care of everything in between. We've got a competitive price point that we do these workshops. most everything's sold out until till October, and I just launched a couple of new ones in October. But that's not the big announcement. The big announcement is we got a product pipeline coming out. So I've been working hard in the background to bring even more educational products that will help you. And then when you see, so be watching if you're, I know you're a member of the newsletter because you found out about this webinar. So if you get the newsletter, be looking out for these things coming out soon. Someone roll them out one at a time, and they're all educational products, and they're all designed to help you become a better photographer. And so I've come up with a mobile app solution. A lot of things we talked about today in terms of particularly animal behavior. I'll be launching a mobile app soon. It's going to first launch for the iPhone, but then shortly thereafter, it's going to be available on the Android platform. And all these things we're talking about are going to be really, really, really inexpensive for you to partake in. So I'm excited about that. Another reason I didn't talk about it before, because you know what I'm talking about. One of the reasons why I went out to Redlands Ranch this past week was to ground proof the latest iteration of the app. I'm still trying to work out a few bugs and try to proof some of the things that I would see going on in the field and see if it correlated with what it's showing on the app. And it's everything's looking good. I'm pretty excited about it. I think it'll be I think when y'all see that, and I'm being kind of vague about it because I want to have a really big rollout for it when the time comes and really talk about all of its features and how it's going to help everybody that use it be a more efficient photographer, nature photographer. And so I'm pretty excited about that. And then also I've got a software application coming out soon. It's all educational. That does have to do with birds, particularly it's a birds in flight trainer. And I think that again, these things are going to be really, really inexpensive. It's my way of giving back to y'all. I mean, of course, you got to charge a little bit, but these things are priced in the dollars, not in the tens of dollars or hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars. They're all pretty inexpensive, but they're simple solutions. They're pretty elegant solutions, but they're pretty simple solutions that again will help you. I've been working on them in the background. I've had a couple of beta testers help me out, help me refine some things. I think you'll be really excited to see these things coming out. And you are the first ones to hear about it. I mentioned a product pipeline a long time ago in a newsletter, and I haven't really talked much about it because I've been trying to get those things going. And then we've got some additional learning projects coming up in the way of just longer form sort of educational coursework kind of stuff, longer form stuff coming out later on this year. But the first two things coming out are going to be the the trainers, the software trainers for doing uh, various kinds of photography, and the mobile apps. Those are the first things coming up. So that's just a little bit. I know I'm being vague on that stuff, but believe me, these things are right around the corner from being launched. I'm excited about it, but again, I wanted y'all to know about it first, so that way when you see it pop up in the newsletter, you're kind of paying attention and you know it's there. So it's gonna be pretty cool. And let me see. I think that's all. And as always, if you don't believe me, I'm a man that puts my money where my mouth is. Stay in touch. I mean, if you've got any questions about anything I talked about, or if you're having problems with your own photographs, reach out to me. I mean, it's I can name you a bunch of people that you know we'll get on a Zoom meeting and we'll look at some pictures. We'll kind of talk through the problems you're having, and that's just me trying to help you guys out because you've heard me say it before. If you've been on any of these webinars, I represent the entire photography enthusiast community of Dodge City, Texas. I am the Dodge City, Texas Photo Club. I have no one else around here to talk photography to. So if people take the time to reach out to me, I will certainly help them and with no strings attached because that's how I learned in the beginning. I had a lot of early mentors to help me out, and so for me to try to not help other people out would be disingenuous and just not who I am. So anyway, hackberryfarmtexas.com if you want to you know just watch out for the newsletters, and then russellgraves.com, russell@russellgraves.com. That's my email address. It is, man, I'm getting good at the timing of this. It is 1 o'clock right now. We've been at this for exactly an hour and I'm winding it down. Again, if you're around tonight and you're a member of in fact, they didn't ask me to say this. I'm just going to say this to them. The Journal is offering a one week subscription to their whole setup for $1 and this week only. And so if you want to spend a dollar and you want to come hear my webinar tonight, because that's a members only webinar for them, I'm not doing it for me. I'm doing it for them, and they want to do it for their members. So that's a members only webinar tonight. If it starts at 7 o'clock Central Time, And so if you want to be a member of that, go over to I think it's well, Google search. I don't know the exact website address, but Google search the Journal of Wildlife Photography. And then I know those guys on the back end. There are a lot of good guys that run that thing. And so if you want to participate in what they do, and I'll see you tonight again. So if no one else has any questions, uh, I'll leave it at that. Again, thanks for showing up. If you came in late, stay tuned. The reason why I have people register for the webinars is I've got your email address. I know you registered for it, and then once you do, you'll be the first one to get this webinar back. So stay tuned. It'll be coming out. You'll get the replay soon. So thanks everyone for participating, and holler at me anytime. Y'all take care.